What really happens in their first year is they'll have pictures of all their seeding operations, of the harvest operations. Eventually, they graduate from photos to video. And, I don't want to dismiss this as just a toy because this is important too. It's important that we enjoy what we do on the farm and that we share what we do on the farm. So a lot of these videos of things happening on the farm really have contributed to public understanding of what we do in agriculture. There's a few people that deliberately use drones as part of that. I mean, one of the guys that really comes to mind here in Western Canada, I don't know if you've seen him on YouTube, but Quick Dick McDick has quite a following in the agriculture crowd, but he's also started to attract interest from other people that share his mindset. And he's shared a lot about what he does on the farm. And that really has contributed in Western Canada to understanding of what's happening on the farm. That's about it for the pretty pictures and videos, though. I'm going to focus most of the rest of the talk on just real hands-on management uses for the drone. And by far the biggest is field mapping of some sort. Once you start mapping with a drone, you get a piece of data as opposed to just a pretty picture. And this specific example I'll keep using throughout the presentation. It was a field that I never stepped foot on. And this was in 2015, and I really just wanted to understand what drones ultimately are going to be capable of doing. I'd heard of the UK hands-free hectare where they seeded and harvested an entire hectare, and I want to see what I could do with a drone without stepping foot on it. And the biggest benefit is all of these images now, even from an Air 2S, like the previous speaker was saying, I mean, all of those images are geo-referenced. And yes, you need to correct some of those things. There's some spectral correction that may be necessary if you're mapping, but for most purposes, that geolocation is accurate enough for you to be able to find that weed that you were taking a picture of years later in a field. So what that lets you do, once you've got data that is georeferenced, you can now measure things on it. And this whole concept of photogrammetry is well established for a lot of people, for farmers. If they've never flown a drone on their own farm yet, it's quite magical, actually, how quickly you can capture how large something is. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is something very simple. How many acres have I got left to harvest tomorrow? With some software, you can do that as quickly as 3 to 4 minutes, capture how large the area is that's left for the next day's operations. One of the biggest uses, though, is when things don't go well. So assessing errors. This was a seed drill where the farmer had purchased the drill with sectional control, and unfortunately the pipes were hooked up the wrong way. So the wrong end of the drill was turning on and off for his entire seeding operation. He seeded 5,000 acres, and at the end of that figured out that there was a problem. The reasons you see all the yellow, this is canola, and this is up near the highway. So he knew the neighbors were going to see this. He went out there and sprinkled some more canola on top to try to hide the issue. But it just accentuated it. But we were brought in this case, by the insurance companies to help settle how many acres were double seeded, how many acres were missed, and then to extract what the value of that was. So similar things, this is another damage issue, assessing spray drift. The farmer on the east side of this had the spray drifted onto my friend's hybrid canola production is what this was. So hybrid seed production, very high value crop. And they determined it was 2 acres that were affected. And as a result, the management decision was to not bring it up with a neighbor. Had that been 14 acres, well, it would have been a different conversation. And again, insurance companies might have been involved. The holy grail is hail damage assessment. At least in our part of the country, we do have a lot of hail. We've got our rivers and our highways that kind of serve as the areas where hail is prevalent, and we're in one of the hail prevalent areas. So it'd be great if we could assess it. Unfortunately, the best you can do right now is spatial determination. Where is there hail damage and where is there not? The actual extent requires boots on the ground still. There's no way to tell if the pods of individual plants have been broken, and it's proven too complex for those trying to do a full-fledged hail assessment. But for spatial distribution, it is ideal. Drones can be used for guided crop scouting as well. This was, again, that hands-free hectare replication that I tried to do. Same field. If you hire someone to scout your crops for you, they typically do a random pattern. It's either a W or a diamond pattern, and the scout will walk that, and that will give them a random sample of what's going on in that field. Our fields are all 160 acres, half mile by half mile, and multiples of that, of course, out here in Western Canada. If you walk one of these patterns on a 160 acre field, you're going to see about 2 to 3% of the field, because we're only 6 feet tall or 5 feet or whatever your height is, and your eye just can't see the whole field. So this is a way of seeing a random sample. If you're a farmer, of course, that's not the crop scouting pattern you're going to use. It looks more like this. And we tend to go to specific benchmarks where we know what we're going to do. This is the spot where I always get wild oats every spring. So if I'm trying to determine whether to put wild oat herbicide into the mix, I would go out to that location and nowhere else, make my decision and pull back out of the field. The problem often is mid-season, because your crop scouting pattern at that point, for almost everybody, looks something like that. You just can't get into many crops. If this is canola or peas or most of the pulse crops, you're not getting in very far to scout that field. And the drone really is a great way to see your crop mid-season. And mapping is great, but it requires a half hour out in the field, another 15 minutes at least to generate the map. You're an hour in before you've got a map of that field. And I don't see that as a scouting tool for most farmers. For high value crops, absolutely. If you're down in Yuma and you're growing lettuce, that's a way to scout your crops, and the time investment may be worth it, but not for Western Canadian broadacre dryland wheat and barley and canola. So it really is a quick way to see your field. Where the value is in a map, though, is in highlighting areas of the field that are good or bad. And that's what I show here. I just switched the camera. This was an Inspire one, actually, back in 2015. We had a self-converted camera. We swapped the filtering in it to create an NDVI map. Well, at this point, that same field looks much different, and you're going to go to locations that are of interest. So you're going to fly to a few different locations and see what's going on there. In today's day and age, you don't need the converted camera anymore. You use Climate Field View or some other satellite source where there's passive data acquisition, and it's really easy to get that data. What was actually going on in this field? Those dark green spots are volunteer peas. So this was a dry spring. Peas didn't germinate. They germinated in the fall when this was supposed to be winter wheat. The red areas in that map were either bare soil or pea residue between the winter wheat rows, which actually is an ideal scenario. So I use this just to show a couple of things. I only took 3 pictures on that field, but I got to understand a lot about what was going on with that crop by using the combination of a vegetative index map today from satellite, flew to 3 locations that are the good, the bad, and the middle, and it gave me lots of information on what's going on in that field. The other thing I use this to show, though, is vegetative indexes are not a silver bullet, because in this case, the red is actually some of the better crop. The green is not as good, because the volunteer peas, to some degree, were outcompeting the winter wheat. So if you type in farm drone into the Google, the first thing you're going to get is all kinds of overselling. Variable rate fertilizer is a big part of that. We're going to save you 30% on your fertilizer bill, and you're going to have 20% more yield, and all kinds of exaggeration. You know, in some cases it's true. And that is things like corn, where you're very nitrogen hungry, you don't have that much variability in your field, and it's understood variability. You actually can use multispectral imaging to create a good fertilizer prescription mid-season. The problem for most of us, at least here in Western Canada, is we're putting down fertilizer in the spring. We're not split applying. We're not going to get into foliar application because it's low efficiency. And because of that, it doesn't really work. But the beauty is the Corn Belt has developed all the software workflows to make it really simple for us to do variable rate seed, herbicide, desiccant, you name it. All of the developments over the last decade have really paved the way for this to become effective in the coming years. Fungicide is one that has been done here in Western Canada quite routinely by some farmers for 5 to 8 years now. Much of it is by satellite, but those that can't get satellite shots under the clouds will use a drone to capture the same data, create their prescription. And in that case, it's more of an economic decision, actually. The areas of the field with high yield potential get some more dollars spent on them. The parts of the field that have low yield potential don't get another dime. And it's more of an economic decision, although it correlates well with the high yield potential areas tend to have higher incidence of disease anyway, because they have a closer canopy, more moisture in the bottom. One of the biggest uses for drones, in my opinion, is quick on-farm trials. Um, when I came back to the farm, I went and did a whole bunch of other things, came back to the farm, and my dad trusted me to do 160-acre trials because he didn't know I was doing them. I was varying the nitrogen rate as we were going up and down the hills. I was doing seeding. I would move nitrogen from top of hill and bottom of hill to the side hill. In our case, we've got fairly rolly land here. I'm in central Alberta, and we had eroded the knolls by decades of tillage. So there's only this much soil on top. The bottom had received all the nutrients and all the soil through development and erosion. And because of that, didn't need more nutrients, but the side hill is where we could use those nutrients. So I did all these great tests. The problem was when it was time for harvest, there wasn't time for us to run yield monitors on all 3 combines and get beautiful yield maps so that I could prove that this worked well. Where the beauty is now is the correlation between cereal crops, oil seeds, between an NDVI of those crops and the final yield, the correlation is like 0.88 to 0.92, just pre-flowering or pre-heading. So getting one shot a year of some check strips that you've put in, like in this example here, doing that in late June, early July for us here, it depends on, of course, your season, really gives you a lot of information on how well those management practices worked without much time and effort. Creating one of these vegetative index maps is something we teach people in 2 days in an ag drone school. They know everything they need to be able to do this. And so this really is within the reach of most farmers now. Where I see another opportunity is simple things like variety trials. This is a variety trial day. You can see how everything is mowed out along those red lines. That's where they're taking the hay wagons, farmers get off, and the sales reps tell them, look at this variety, it's got this kind of resistance, and look at how tall it is. But you're looking at a random sample along that edge. You're really not seeing the crop. Where I see the value is when you see differences like this, right? This is the same image, and these are different canola varieties seeded east to west. And those spots are semi-solonetzik. We call them gumbo. It's a very poorly drained soil, somewhat saline in a lot of cases. And those canola varieties are handling those soil conditions much differently. If you make the effort of walking the 200 yards through, waist high at least canola, you're going to find out a lot about how those 3 varieties are going to perform in your soil conditions on the worst part of your field. And this is where I see the resolution of drones really shining over satellite, because you'll be able to see these kinds of differences quite effectively. This is an example of a problem with a chaff spreader. It's a vegetative index map, NDVI, 2 years after they had a problem with the chaff spreader, and you can still see the lack of uniformity in crop. Another way to use a drone is just run a video. Take a look at your chaff spreader. Take a look at how soil is flowing over your shanks on your seeder. Take a look at the header and how grain is coming in. It's hard to see often from the cab. The camera is just a great way to monitor your operations. And yes, you can share this to social media too. There's lots of other benefits, but it lets you get a look at how your operations are running before you have to notice it in crop 2 years later. This is an example submitted by one of our customers. He had previously harvested this entire quarter section of land. Then it was a really wet winter, and it looked like there was going to be a major drought out, and he couldn't seed most of the parts of the field. So he just used it as a way to calculate how many bags of canola to buy for this one variety for that field. Very simple use, took him about 20 minutes, and he didn't overpurchase seed. That picture says 1,000 words. You can see the different varieties here and evaluate which ones are going to stand up well enough for your cropping scenario. Same thing here. This is lodging as well. Same customer actually as pre-season planting. Steve Nelson is his name. So what he mapped here was the amount of lodging. You can see visually just in the top half of the field where a lot of the barley has lodged, whereas it hasn't at the bottom. So you're more likely to make malt quality on the bottom half of that field. And he used it to split bin the crop. So hedged his bets and made sure that he was going to make malt on at least a portion of the field, if not the mix. We have a lot of noxious weeds here in Alberta specifically, where the counties are tasked with monitoring them, and the enforcement, though, is the farmer needs to eradicate those noxious weeds if it's on their land. So this is from one of the counties. One of their summer students developed a way to monitor the leafy spurge control efforts from year to year, using multispectral imagery from a drone. And very much like some of the other presentations you've seen today, very scientifically involved to get there. But once the algorithm is built, anyone can apply this kind of algorithm to the imagery they collect. Our crop insurance here has a compensation scheme where you can be compensated for the trampling of crops by wildlife. The biggest example is a herd of 250 elk that kind of follow the south edge of the Peace River, and there's a federal program to compensate those farmers. And the big benefit of the drone here is they don't need to wait for the adjuster to show up. It's a very remote area. There's not that many adjusters, and demand is really high in late August. So the farmer can now map those fields and start combining rather than wait for the adjuster to show up for a few days, which we know doesn't happen. Farmers aren't going to delay harvest for a trampling claim, no matter how large it is. They need to get the crop off. So this is fairly well developed. It does measure the trampling. It does not currently measure the amount of grazing that goes on along the sides of that path. We don't have irrigation right where I farm, but a lot of my customers further south do. And one of the easiest things is run your pivots on some bare soil and just see what the water distribution looks like. Of course, sensors in the soil are great too, and a lot of these guys will have variable rate pivots, but this is just a quick and dirty way to check it. The other way you can check it is the results of the vegetation. So this is a shot of some corn from the side. Most crops look good if they're a tall crop because you can't see the tops of them. You see the fiascos in the fall when you're harvesting, because from the cab you can often see the difference in height in addition to health. But an NDVI map of that same field reveals where there are some issues with the nozzles that you should be correcting now rather than waiting till the end of the season. Another water-related issue is finding drainage tile. This particular shot was in the early years. I think it was about 2015 down in Iowa, and still had a thumb in the shot. It was pretty poor imagery. But this was reflectance from those small soybean plants that was used to create those, see the yellow lines, the vertical lines, an image of where the drainage tile is. Most guys that are doing this now are doing it after a rain with a thermal camera. So you'll get very different heat emission from the parts of the field that are still water soaked and those that aren't. This is an example where drone imagery actually revealed a big problem on the farm that you couldn't see in satellite. This was free imagery provided by General Mills to a project partner up here. We do some modeling of greenhouse gas emissions and similar things, and to entice farmers to be in the room, they got free NDVI imagery. Well, this was the organizer, and he says, I don't need another NDVI shot of our farm. And then when he got this, he said, there's something wrong with the imagery because you've got these red streaks going up and down. We don't have that issue. Well, they walked the field and they found out that for many years, their urea spreader had been missing about 8 feet or really low overlap on 8 feet. So we set it and forget it often for things like a urea spreader. He discovered the issue with the drone imagery, and that variability was not visible in any of the satellite shots that he'd looked at for years. The solution for him actually was bigger than just fixing the calibration on the spin spreader. This is the young generation, and he wanted the fertilizer to be with the seed. So they bought an air drill rather than broadcasting fertilizer, which has many other benefits for their farm. Another big use is documenting flooding and drainage. This is contributed by one of our customers. You can see the straight line kind of down the middle there. He's already taking several water bodies and combining them with each other. We don't get into the legalities of that because you do require permitting here in Alberta for that type of thing. But a well-timed shot like this really helps you understand your water patterns. But even better, with consumer level drones, you can now map and create digital elevation models. So you can create a map of how water is going to flow on your field for a quarter section of 160 acres, about a half an hour time investment in the field, another half an hour at the computer, and you have a digital elevation model that you can use for water planning. So that whole effect of 3D modeling really has a lot of uses. For us, the rural municipalities were the first to adopt this. Most of our gravel piles now, the stockpile volumes are all measured by drone. In a lot of cases, it's actually the agriculture staff in our counties that are doing this work. In this case, you're looking at a silage pit that I'd imaged and a barley pile, and you can measure the volume remaining in that silage pit using drone imagery. And this is how that's done. You basically have the drone fly a grid pattern, and through the photogrammetric process, it creates a 3D model, and then you can measure the cut and fill. Also great for a new water dugout, for example, to measure exactly how much water you're going to have in there if you're using that for irrigation or watering cattle. Most of our feedlots are now using drones to count cattle. There's software very appropriately named countingthings.com that does an excellent job of that count. Sometimes when you have a tan animal on tan bedding or black Angus on some black soil, you'll have some difficulty, but otherwise this works really well. How am I doing for time?
2 minutes, I think, but I think you started a little bit late, so go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, I started about 7 minutes late, but I do want to get you back on
that's
time.
okay.
So I'll run through the remaining ones really quickly, because ultimately there are probably 200 use cases I could have. Thermal cameras are very special, though. This was flown this summer, 1 o'clock in the morning, completely pitch black with a new moon, and you can still find your cattle very effectively. So I've got lots of cattle uses here. Surface rights issues are something that I've been brought in to resolve many times as a consultant. The problem is I'm usually brought in to map fields after people have competing land users have left that field. I see lots of opportunity to capture the befores. So any farmer that owns a drone, I always suggest they at least get a few pictures, if not a 3D model of that land before somebody else starts using it. That gives them lots of leverage if things aren't put back the way that they should be. We're very rural here in Western Canada. Often it takes half an hour, 2 hours for police to arrive, let alone fire departments. So having a drone really is a way to access dangerous locations, get some imagery. In this case, it was an ammonia tank that blew out, and he happened to have the drone along with him in the tractor cab. Most of our rural municipalities buy drones first for checking beaver dams. So that tends to be the first use. Just a comparison of drone versus satellite imagery. When you need resolution, the drone is the way to get it. If you want it cheap, the satellite is the way to get it, and sometimes that is the best tool. I'm just going to do one more thing here before I skip to the end. YouTube is often wrong on which drones work best. There's a specific model called the Mavic 3 that was released. This was in February of 2022 at the Maricopa Farm, right where you are actually. I was doing some work there, and the Mavic 3 had been released, so when I had some time to kill, I thought I'd test my new toy. YouTube at the time was saying the zoom camera on the top of that drone is just not good enough. It's only 12 megapixel, and I echo the sentiment. Resolution is not everything. It's only 12 megapixel. And it gets grainy as soon as you get to like 14 times zoom and 28 times zoom. It's way too grainy. Farmers tend to use the drone by looking at the screen and making a decision, whereas most other users take a picture, color grade, post-process. Most farmers never take that picture to their computer and do anything else with it. They make the decision on the screen. So for those that are buying a new drone for imaging, I always suggest get an optical zoom if you can at all. And this demonstrates that fairly well. So that piece of equipment that you see sitting out there, can you guess what it is? At 2 times zoom, at 4 times zoom, at 7 times zoom, at 14 times zoom, and at 28 times zoom. I didn't move the drone here. That is just purely manipulating a scroll wheel at the top right of my controller to go from that image to that image. And it lets you make decisions. If this was a moose or a cow or a bull, you can make decisions quickly by identifying that animal. And I just see that optical zoom as being critical. Same field again, actually, I thought I'd use it on crop. This is about 10 meters above the ground at 1 times, 2 times, 4 times, 7 times, 14 times, 28 times zoom. So again, without moving the drone, you go from that to that. And I feel zoom is critical for most farmers. If they don't know what they're buying as a scouting tool, you need zoom on there. I'll skip through the last few. We offer training. That's kind of how we get farmers into using drones effectively. We've got a basic ag drone school, and we will actually be down in Arizona next week on the 8th and 9th. The unfortunate part is what we're teaching there is Canadian regulations. So we spend more than half the day teaching Canadian farmers that happen to be in Arizona, or one of them's coming down with us actually, and teaching them the Canadian regulations in your beautiful warm weather down there, and then coming back up to Canada so they can use it next spring. So if you are interested in that, or if there happen to be any Canadian farmers in the room, we'd be happy for you to join us next week.
Thank you very much.
I don't think we have time for questions. I do have another talk I'm giving this afternoon on spraying. If you want to leave the questions till then.
Okay. Yeah. Do we have questions? Your contact information, you said you are coming here next week, but if you can share the contact information with me, I would share it with everyone who attended.
There it is.
Good. So maybe a picture of someone.
Thank you, Diaa. My presentation this morning will be short, so I will give you maybe more time for the lunch. So the objective of this one is to do high throughput phenotyping for small plots, because we are working on plant genotypes, and the plant genotypes we are working on are many, and we are using small plots. So we are trying to use this phenotyping, the spectral system, and also the image system. How can we do turf grass phenotyping for small plots? So when we do this, we have different treatments also. On the layer of the genotype, we also have irrigation treatments, different deficit irrigation treatment. And we want to see how we can utilize this technology to facilitate, the cultivar development with high precision, and also with rapid identification of desirable characteristics in the plant genotypes. So we are working on multiple species of turf grasses, mostly the warm season turf grasses, and we are also working on native species which are adaptable to this environment. So this morning I will present what we have been doing with a team from the University of Arizona, Dr. Diaa. And I'm presenting only what we have done on Bermuda grass. So in here, we have about 48 different genotypes or hybrids, and we planted them in 2 replications, but we planted them in 3 different irrigation treatments. So the experimental design we are using here is a split plot. The large plot is the irrigation plot, and the small plots are assigned to the genotypes we have. So we are working on 2 layers of treatment, the genotypes and also the irrigation. So for this, we are using just cutting edge control system, irrigation control system that can output a certain amount of water in the area we want in the time we define. And if you see the genotypes at early stage, they are different, especially in establishment rate. Some of them, they establish very fast. Some of them, they take time to establish. So we see this genetic difference among our genotypes. And then after some time, we got the the plot area we want. So the plot area we have here is 1.5 by 1.5 meters. That is 2.25 meters square area for each genotype. And then when you see closely, we see that there is a difference between these plots, different in color, different in density, different in also turf quality. And then we are using both the conventional assessment, which is really used across turf breeding being used for turf breeding for centuries. And then we are trying to see which high throughput phenotyping works for our plots. So in this case, we are using the drones. We are using the RGB image, and also we are using the cart loaded with different sensors. So in this case, we used the drones, and for the drones, Diaa and Said are the one who are collecting the data and process the data. And then what we do is we analyze the data post-processing after we got the data from them. So if you see here, this is our plot that I showed the picture before. This is the orthomosaic of the plot. And this is in the middle of the summer in 2022. And you can see that the three different level of irrigation we are using is we are replacing the ET or the evapotranspiration at 100%, at 75%, and at 50%. So when we factor the crop coefficient, this ET replacement will go to 80, 60, and 40% of the ET. And then this is the NDVI image we get after processing the data. And the data is from the MicaSense Altum sensor. So from the NDVI, we can see the variation between genotypes and also the performance of the genotypes across deficit irrigation system. And you can see the 100%, most of the plots are really, they look perfect here. And at 75, some of the plots are really performing better and some are not. But here we can see only few genotypes are really performing under high deficit irrigation system. And then we had taken also the temperature, the canopy temperature from the mica sensor. So from the canopy temperature, we can see some of the plots in the high deficit irrigation are really affected or they are hot. And in the 100% irrigation system, we see only few plots are really struggling to establish. And then we are collecting this data every other week. So we wanted to see overall what the impacts of the deficit irrigation on all of the hybrids. So the x-axis is the weeks that after treatment, after irrigation treatment started. So 4 weeks after irrigation treatment, we don't see any difference here. But at 5 weeks, we see the difference. In this case, the one with 50% deficit irrigation replacement is very much affected. And we cannot identify the 75 and the 100 at this level. And though also there is, this is the irrigated field, but sometimes in summer, we get the monsoon rain. So when the rain comes, at 6 weeks after starting the treatment, we get some amount of irrigation, rain. So, the values, the NDVI we calculated for all of the 3 different irrigation levels jumped a little bit because of the impact of the rain. Then it starts going down. So we are seeing this one every other week, and we can calculate for genotypes also. And then when we see for the number of genotypes we tested, for the genotypes we tested, we could identify 3 different types of for genotypes. The first one here are, most of them are the drought sensitive ones, because they are performing well under 100, but they are performing badly for the high deficit irrigation. And then there are some which are really tolerant to drought. This is a preliminary data. So we can see that some of the genotypes, they perform relatively well even under deficit irrigation. But also we saw another group of genotypes which are really low performers overall in terms of color, in terms of quality, and also in terms of environmental stress tolerance. And then there are other potential drought tolerant genotypes, as we have seen. So there are some which are really performing very well at deficit irrigation system. But this is only a 1-year data that we got. So we repeated for 2023, but this is a work in progress. So the data analysis is not done. And then we are also doing, if the deficit irrigation is affecting our genotypes performance, and we are doing the conventional visual assessment of the genotypes every other week. So based on this one, we collected the data, as you can see, at different days after the irrigation treatment started. And here, our irrigation treatment starts May 1st. So you can see in the middle of June, early July, that you know, the genotypes are significantly different. The irrigation is significantly different, and also the irrigation into genotype interaction is significantly different. That means this, you know, the irrigation treatment is impacted maybe later or in the middle of the summer, even though we started our irrigation treatment at May 1st. And you can see the quality performance of the different irrigation treatments, because in the conventional assessment, we use 1 to 9 scale, 9 the best, 1 the worst. So you can see the ET 100 is really performing close to 7 out of 9, but you know, the ET 50% replacement is really below the average, because everything above 5 is acceptable in turf evaluation. And this is also the color, and the same thing we observed with you know, irrigation treatment differences and genotype differences, but not the irrigation into genotype differences until late in the summer. So you can see that you know, also it is the difference started about 6 weeks after the treatment started. 6 weeks into our irrigation treatment. That means early in the spring and early in the summer, the impact is low, but the impact of deficit irrigation is devastating maybe in the middle of the summer on most of the genotypes, although there are some which are really tolerant to the drought. And then we are also assessing the RGB imaging. we are collecting the RBG image, maybe about 2 meters from the canopy. So we collect them, and then when we process them, we process for deep green color index, and we are calculating in relation to NDVI that we collected the same day for this treatment. So if you can see here, for the 100% heat replacement irrigation, we see most of the genotypes perform very well, but there are some which are really bad. So this is we think this is a genetic difference. And at 75, there are some still performing very well, but the low performing ones are still there. But when you reduce the irrigation, or when we the high deficit irrigation system, we may not see many performing very well. So if you can see, there are only few green dots that indicate that there are only few genotypes that are drought tolerant and perform under deficit irrigation system. So in the breeding process, we always use screening. We are screening the genotypes. Even though we start with thousands or hundreds, we end up with few that can be released as cultivars. So, but we are working on the identity of these genotypes because these dots represent our genotypes that I did indicate. So we know the identity of these genotypes, and we are repeating this type of experiment to see across different years. And this is a quality, the one we saw before is the color, and this is the turf quality. So turf quality based on the NDVI. So we can see that at 100%, there are some good quality ones, and at 75, there are those performed at full irrigation, also performed at 75%. And then the few we are considering as a potential cultivar that are still performing very well. And this is a cover because water affects the growth of the plant to cover the area. So this is what we see is we are looking at how it covers the ground, how much the ground coverage we get in the plots. So the same thing, we got some which are really growing very bad, and there are some which are really good and cover 100% of the plot. And then in the 50% irrigation, there are only which are really good for covering the area, the plot area we are looking at. And this is the impact of the deficit irrigation, but we are still getting few genotypes which are really performing under high, deficit irrigation or 50% deficit irrigation. So for short, this is what we have for our experiment. But we also use the cart equipped with different sensors, and we collected a large amount of data, and we are processing data. So we want to see which one works for us as a tool or as a high phenotyping tool for our plots. Is that the drone, is that the cart, or is that the image system that we can utilize to develop our cultivars for this part of the country where drought and heat is really a major concern for turf adoption and also turf performance by reducing the water applied for turf. So in short, this is what I have. So as I said, I gave you a good time for the line time. So if you have any question, let me know. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions? Questions? Okay, online. So I would like to mention about this study. We flew our drones in this study. We helped this in his experiment. And the nice thing about it, from what you have seen, is that something simple as in NDVI can be used to show you areas in your field where it's missing water or it's receiving like more than usual or more than full irrigation for some reason because of leaks and stuff like that. NDVI is not only available through drones, but online, as you have seen from Kapil's presentation, where you can get it through their software, and there are lots of other sources for free, like OpenET. You can go there and access NDVI, so you can check the status of your crops and stuff like that. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Tim Holt. He's a tenured professor in the College of Aviation with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, teaching undergraduate and graduate courses in aeronautics, safety, unmanned systems, and airport management for Bachelor of Science in Aeronautics program and the Masters in Safety Science program. Before his current role, he served a 22 years career in the United States Navy. We are very happy to have him as a speaker in this workshop. And Tim, we are ready for your presentation.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that kind introduction. And is the screen shown okay? And you can hear me okay as well?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, excellent. So I know you've got a lot going on today. You've got a busy agenda. So, this probably won't take the full amount of time for a few of the basics that I want to give. Once again, so drones, when we talk drones, we talk about a system with an identity
Can you
crisis.
raise your voice a little bit, please?
Oh, how's that better?
Yeah, just if you raise your voice a little bit.
Okay, how's that?
I think it's good.
Okay. So we talk about a system with identity crisis. You know, we hear UAS, we hear drones, unmanned aircraft systems, uncrewed systems or uncrewed aircraft systems, remotely piloted aircraft, remotely piloted aircraft systems. It's not really defined name-wise, so typically we stick with either just drone or UAS. Now, UAS in companies or really encapsulates the whole system. You've got the aircraft system itself, you've got the ground control station, and then command and control links. So it's not just necessarily the aircraft, but it's the payload, the mission, and making sure that where that's getting linked to. We use it for dangerous, difficult, dirty, or dull work.
Sorry again, they said they cannot hear. So if you can lower, I mean, make it higher a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I'm about as much as what I can do on this end.
Okay. Okay, no problem.
All right. How's that better?
Yeah. That's fine. That's
okay.
Fine. Yeah.
So dangerous, difficult, dirty, or work. Really, it's where we're not putting humans at risk. And it's more maneuverable, agile, but it's also quite a bit less expensive than manned aircraft, either fixed wing or helicopter. In fact, if you've ever seen the Real World Design Challenge, which is an international high school challenge, typically the two competitions they do the most for planning are either agricultural or pipeline work. Agricultural, they typically design missions around moisture or infestations. Two things that we'll really go over that really have to be understood is one, the FAA owns the airspace. So regardless of where you take off and land from, once you're off the ground, the FAA owns that airspace. So if you look behind me and through my back window, that's the campus. The airspace around this campus and what this campus falls under is Class Delta, which is up to 2,500 feet AGL or above ground level. So regardless if somebody takes off or the chancellor of the campus can prevent somebody from taking off or landing on the campus itself, once it's off the ground, you're within the FAA airspace, so the FAA controls that. So somebody could take off outside of this campus, fly over the campus, and there's nothing the campus leadership can do about that because it's the FAA requirement. And that's based off of 49 of the US code. So any aircraft and device are used or intended for flight, and UAS or aircraft must comply with FAA regulations. Most of what you're concerned with is going to be right here on this chart. So this gray area of small UAS aircraft or under 55 pound is the gray area falls between, are you a hobbyist or are you non-recreational or commercial operation? If you're a hobbyist, you have no pilot requirements. You still must be registered if over 55 pounds, at least the aircraft registration, and you must notify all airports air traffic control within 5 miles of proposed area of operations. So if you're at a park, you have no pilot requirements. You don't fall under what's called Part 107. You must always yield the right of way to unmanned aircraft and keep aircraft in visual line of sight. So you cannot go beyond visual line of sight or BVOS, and must follow community-based safety guidelines. So depending on what that park or recreational park and recs has in requirement for UAS, if you buy a Inspire or a Unique or a DJI Phantom or something, let's say at Costco, and you're just a hobbyist, it's basically just making sure you have strong situational awareness for the airspace, but you have no pilot requirements. Educational, recreational flying only for these definitions. Now for commercial use, that's where now you're basically having a professional entity brought in. You are now an aircraft or an operational aviation unit. So you must have a remote pilot airman certificate. That was what we call the Part 107 remote pilot. Must be 16 years or older, and you must pass TSA vetting. If you're already a manned aircraft or a manned pilot, all you basically have to do is take a test on the FAA site or the flight FAA safety team site to get your remote pilot. If you're not a fixed wing pilot or a commercial pilot in any regards, then you have to take a basically what we call a ground exam to get your pilot certificate for remote pilot or UAS pilot certificate. This involves a 60 question test with a score of 70 in order to get that. Must be less than 55 pounds. Anything over 55 pounds falls into a different class. Must be registered, and Class G airspace without air traffic or ATC permission. Class B, C, D, and E requires ATC permission, which would then fall under the LANCE request through the FAA. And that's just basically making sure that the tower controllers know if you're going to be operating within a certain airspace and within a certain classification. Fly under 400 feet. Now this is 400 feet above the highest obstacle. So if you have a tower at 100 feet, that's 400 feet above that. So you're really fine flying 500 feet above ground level or AGL, and must fly it at or below 100 miles per hour. Once again, always yielding the right of way to manned aircraft. You must not fly over people, must not fly from a moving vehicle. So unless you're flying over a parade where you've got permissions, you've done a request, you've done all the required paperwork, you're not flying over populated areas, and you're not following or actually being controlled from moving vehicles. This is flying for commercial use. So agricultural, tourism, real estate, those sort of ventures, that all falls within that environment. Arizona's law uses the terms model aircraft, civil unmanned aircraft, and public unmanned aircraft to describe drones as used for different purposes. Model aircraft is an unmanned aircraft that's capable of sustained flight in the atmosphere. Civil unmanned aircraft is unmanned aircraft or unmanned. Once again, this is where everything gets really wonky, is between hobbyist and commercial. and of course, what we're calling the aircraft or the aircraft system. Every county, state, municipality has their own definitions and falls within their own laws. So before you start flying, you always want to research the laws of the county or municipality you're flying within. Public unmanned aircraft or an unmanned aircraft operated by a public agency for government-related purpose. Once again, law enforcement, unmanned aircraft and aircraft, including an aircraft commonly known as a drone that is operated without the possibility of direct human intervention. So that could be a fully autonomous or programmable aircraft that is going through its own flight profile. If you're using anything by any critical facilities are designed as listed here: petroleum, aluminum refineries, chemical, anything that could have a critical infrastructure to it. And energy control centers, distribution. This is why the TSA is involved, because they want to make sure that an aircraft, or especially an UAS aircraft, isn't being used for means that we want to prevent. Unlawful operation of model unmanned aircraft, state preemption, classification definitions. You can see they're prohibited by federal law or regulation, including FAA regulation, and they kind of interfere with the operation of law enforcement, firefighters, or emergency services. Here in Prescott, obviously we have issues with firefighting, high burn times, and forest fire times. And over the last few years, people wanting to get that video, trying to get something uploaded to YouTube, have prevented from emergency services from fighting those fires because of drone usage. That's a Class 1 misdemeanor, and most serious misdemeanor offenses and punishable by up to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and a $2,500 fine plus surcharges. So you cannot operate within the lawful movement of aircraft. Careless or reckless aircraft operation violation of classification definition is a person who operates an aircraft, model aircraft, and civil unmanned aircraft in the air, on the ground, or in the water in a careless or reckless manner, and that can be a Class 1 misdemeanor as well. UAV laws by local governments within Arizona. Once I again state, you really have to research your local area or municipality or county. So, for example, Maricopa, this county ordinance states that all UAV pilots must not operate their crafts in a manner that has the potential to create a hazard to the general public. The ordinance also bans drones and model aircraft from operating in county-owned regional parks or recreational areas. The only exceptions are those spaces designated for UAVs. Drone pilots can learn more about designated UARC fields from the Phoenix Drone User Group. Most parks, most national parks and state parks, you're going to see a sign stating exactly where and how you can use them. Some will have specific sites set aside for videography or photography. Others will say just non-drone use, no drone flying within this area. So that's kind of the down and dirty. The biggest thing is to make sure that you're not flying greater than 500 feet AGL or above the largest or highest obstacle within that area. If it's for commercial means, making sure that you have all of your pilot certifications as required, and always research the areas that you're going to fly in for counties or municipalities. With that, I know you've got other things coming up, but I'm happy to answer any questions or any concerns that you might have.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I thought you finished. Do you still have some other slides?
You can distribute those as well. Most of those are from counties outside of Maricopa, so probably a little bit less of a concern of what you have. But that's really the kind of the down and dirty of most of the concerns when utilizing UAS for commercial use.
Any questions? Just one.
For the spray drone license, I believe it's the 137. Can you apply for the exemption before getting your 137 license?
As far as airspace exemption or utilizing for that like an area
For-
exemption?
Yeah, for drone use exemption for ag.
Yeah, you can apply for it. It's just you're still gonna have to make sure that you have your actual pilot certifications or qualifications in line. But you can definitely apply for that. And just making note that you have, once the actual operation is being conducted, to make sure that all other laws are complied with.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other question? So I have a question. We're talking about the drones and how we cannot fly 2 or 3 drones at the same time, right? Do you think there may be a change in that area? Like people would be able to fly more than 1 drone?
Are you
One
talking as far as
pilot?
like one controller and 2 drones?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a change. The biggest thing is you're going to have to make sure you have an observer and then the pilot or the operator. So you're always, either 2 observers and the 1 pilot. I think it's just going to be more of a manning level. And then obviously not being completed from a moving vehicle or so forth, but it's going to be more for the observation side.
Okay. Thank you. Just one more question.
I have a question about VLAS, visual line of sight. Is there any update about that? Because they were talking about going above that for some people.
You can apply for an exemption to go fly beyond visual line of sight through the FAA. So it's not out of the realm of possibility as long as you're approved to do it.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, we have one here.
So after you take the test and your license expires, how do you renew? You don't have to take the test again, do you?
No, actually, they make it very, very easy on you. So when you're getting up for time for renewal, you don't have to do the same test as far as Part 107 to get your pilot certificate. You get on the flight safety site, FAA, fastteam.gov, fastgov, and there's it's like a 3-question test that you just take annually at that point.
Any
And
other question?
it doesn't cost anything, which is nice.
Okay. If there is anyone to answer questions about regulations, I would say Dr. Tim is the one to answer. So if you have anything, you need to ask now. Otherwise, we'll have to move to the next speaker. Nothing? Nothing online? Oh, we have one here.
Can you comment on the new remote ID regulation that's coming up in March 16th?
I'm still looking into that one myself, but if you want to shoot me an email, I'll get you some information on that.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone online? Okay. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And you guys have a great rest of your conference.
And now we have Marcos. We introduced him before, so he will give another presentation. Go ahead, Marcos.
Thanks for the introduction again, and thanks for the opportunity to do this talk. We're going to be talking about spraying drones this time. The regulatory framework in the US and Canada is quite different. So I won't go into the details of the aviation side. It is quite different here in Canada. And in some ways, it's frankly way more accommodating than the FAA. Transport Canada has been bending over backwards to enable the use of drones while still making sure that they protect our airspace. So we actually have, one of the questions you just had in the room was swarming. We've had the ability to swarm drones for years, since 2019. With the new set of regulations, you could swarm up to 5 drones under the regulations, as long as the system is designed to swarm. So with the earlier models, like the Agris T10 2030, the technology allowed us to swarm, and we could practically and legally do that here in Canada already for quite some time. And it's one of the big holdups in the States with the FAA still. Conversely, on the regulatory side for pesticides, we are way behind the United States. The EPA is allowing application of a lot of products in a lot of states, and we have not a single crop protection product that can be applied legally by drone yet. That doesn't mean we can't tell you about what's being applied. Farmers tend to not always follow the regulations, so there's some off-label application happening now. So what I'll give you is just an introduction to spraying by drone, the things we've seen in the last 4 years now, or 3 seasons ago, I guess it was, we started. This is how we started. This is my daughter, Bianca. She works with us in the business. And we got our first spraying drone in 2021. And it was an Agris T20, 20-liter model. So that's about 5 gallons. And all of us were just incredibly excited about it. Big smiles. We took pictures with our shop mascot. All of us were excited about the size of this thing. Well, it's already outdated, obsolete, and half the size of last year's model. So things are advancing incredibly quickly on the technology, but it was a great unit to start with. We had some research dollars at the time. So as much as our company is all about selling hardware and selling training, on the side, we're always participating in research. When we come down to Arizona next week, I'm going to try and do some spray deposition testing, width testing as well, because your weather is a little bit more conducive than ours this time of year. What we figured out from the first, when we first unboxed these drones, is that the spraying system had been better thought out than we imagined. We've been drone resellers since 2015, and we assumed the drone companies had lots of experience in aviation, but none in spraying. Well, we've seen advancements in the last 3 years, huge advancements with the atomizers that are now on the newer models of drones, whether DJI or XAG, that provide huge advantages. But the biggest surprise of all, really, that first year was that the claims of large acreage spraying weren't exaggerated. I imagined it was like when you buy a Mavic drone and you're supposed to fly 45 minutes, it actually flies 20. That's kind of what we imagined with the claims of 40 acres per hour. There's people spraying 40 acres per hour with Agris T40s. So as much as we thought these would not be tools for large acreage agriculture, I have customers now, farmers, that have sprayed 4,500 acres by the middle of July, one guy with one drone. So they really are going to be a large acreage tool, not limited to just spot spraying. That first year, we kind of embarked on comparison between different systems. The one on the left is an Agris T20. The one on the right was a comparable model from Helio at the time, an Ag 122. It had 2-liter tank, two 11-liter tanks as opposed to 120. It had 8 props instead of 6. But frankly, aside from those 2 differences, there really weren't any huge differences between the deposition systems. Almost every system that's currently commercially available has flat fan nozzles, or until last year, had flat fan nozzles underneath a propeller. And that propeller creates all kinds of vortexing air, which has benefits, but it also has a lot of drawbacks. Sorry, is my volume too low?
No, you're good. No, I was
Okay.
just taking the speaker.
Okay. So we did a lot of comparison, and what we found though at the end of the season was, unless we were comparing these 2 models against each other, every time we were doing anything where we're actually depositing spray, where we're testing swarming, whatever it was, there was one model we pulled out of the barn, and it was the one with the easy button. The software on DJI just beats all the others at the moment. And I mean, I share everybody's enthusiasm about eventually having a North American model that's effective. But unfortunately, I haven't come across that model yet. And I think we're years away from somebody taking DJI's crown away in terms of ruling the market here. And we'll see how all the things pan out in the US, especially around the politics of that, when you're in the middle of trade fights. But in terms of product, the software on DJI really makes it a tool that's usable. And that's the only product we're selling at the moment. We're not exclusive to DJI, very deliberately, because I think at some point there will be other competitors. But right now it is the one product. So most of what I'm going to talk about today is with experience with DJI drones, although we have tried others. One of the big negatives in terms of initial thoughts So this was a pattern that we imagined. These were some trials that we did with BASF. What you're looking at is a plot of canola. On the left and right is canola going to flower. Down the middle is canola sprayed by heat, contact herbicide. And you can see the lines there. I mean, it is a nice straight path. Well, I'd like to say this was a drone, but I'm going to move that to the back of the shot because this was actually a hand boom at 20 centimeters above crop. Perfect spray out. So I'm moving that to the back of the shot, and in front of that now is the drone pattern. And I've tried to draw lines here, but really there is no line. So this is one of the reasons that we can spray at large acreage, because all that turbulent air is distributing these droplets across an incredibly wide width. My apologies for using metric numbers. We've been converting since 1979, so our spray widths are kind of in the 9-meter range, 30, 32 feet with an Agris T40. And that's on a drone that is like 2.5 meters across. So we need that in order to get real field efficiencies. We need to use this turbulent air to distribute the droplets, but the downside of that is we're never going to have a straight edge along anything. So it really is not a tool for any small scale plots, even mid-sized plots. Field scale trials, absolutely. It's a great tool and very cost effective, but this is something that you really need to realize. And for me, the biggest takeaway from that learning in that first year is that we really need to calibrate the overlap region carefully. This is not like setting a sprayer where calibrating flow rate is essential. That part is the easy part with a spraying drone. But calibrating the amount of overlap is like calibrating a granular spreader. And you remember that one slide in my previous presentation where somebody was surprised that it was off by 8 feet. Well, we're going to have those kinds of scenarios. Luckily, right now, most people doing this at scale are applying fungicide, and the streaking is not going to be visible. It's very forgiving, or at least not easily visible. Once people start applying herbicide, we're going to start to see some issues with spray width miscalibration. So that's actually where we spend most of our time in our spraying clinic, is accurately measuring that spray width. So what we've been doing for the last few years has been funded by results-driven agricultural research. The Alberta government got out of research and kind of gave money to an organization that hands that out on a project basis. So we've been working with Lakeland College, one of the big agricultural colleges here in Alberta, and with Cooperative, the chem company, to get the research authorization to be able to apply product legally. And what we've been doing is mapping Canada thistle. Those of you not familiar with that weed, it's very spotty. So you'll get often along field edges a lot of Canada thistle, and then within you'll often get them in depressions or areas that have higher water holding capacity or poorly drained soil sometimes. So you'll get these spots of Canada thistle, and the idea was we map it, we apply. So very similar to what you saw in the Pix4D Magic tool, which is something that we've evaluated as well since this time. At the time I was using Picterra, but the Magic tool in Pix4D Fields does something similar, where we're trying to create an accurate prescription. We get decent accuracy, but by decent, I mean 85, 88% on this off-the-shelf software. And that was thistle being mapped in a pasture. In annual crop, we can get higher accuracy than that, but it is still time consuming and not something that you can do off the shelf, in my opinion, at this point. Most of the Magic tool works. The Magic tool works really well if it's a very obvious spectrally or structurally different weed. It is possible to use something like that, but not for identifying very small weeds. Like a wild oats in barley, as an example, is not achievable at the moment by anybody that I'm aware of. That being said, for spotty weeds like this, it's an amazing tool. So step one, we identify the polygons. Step two, we're testing efficacy. Most of the efficacy testing, the research authorizations by our regulatory agency, require comparison to ground spray, and they require different water volumes. Just out of necessity, we have to use really low water volume with these drones. As great as they are as a tool, they're still relatively small to any ground sprayer. And so what we're doing here is 3 different concentrations, the same chemical amount per acre being applied, just at different water volumes. So 30, 50, and 100 liters per hectare, which equates to about 3 gallon an acre, 5 gallon an acre, and 10 gallon an acre. 10 is just not achievable in a field scenario. We figured that out very quickly. So most of the newer research authorizations are going 3 gallon, 2 gallon, 1.5 gallon, 1.2 gallon. Definitely some need to test efficacy at lower water volume, and there will, for most chemical products, be a minimum threshold there where you just don't get good efficacy anymore. So definitely some testing needed there. And then step 2 is we actually spray. We create the polygons, prep the chem, and then we spray. And this is a typical plot of, I think it was about 4 by 6 meters at the time. Since that time, we've just started flying manually. For those of you that know the Agris world, we fly in M+ mode more often than not. And M+ mode, the drone is basically controlling everything except you're pushing forward to basically trigger the flight once you've positioned it. So we spray, we collect lots of metadata. In all cases, we're always putting down water sensitive paper to measure spray quality, or if nothing else, to document spray quality. Even if we were to do this commercially, I would recommend something like this. And then the water sensitive paper lets you see the differences in spray quality, but more importantly, you can measure it. So we have a device out of Brazil called a drop scope. You feed the water sensitive paper into it, scan it, and it will tell you the distribution of droplet size. And these were some initial ones. So what you're looking at, the D denotes the drone, G is ground, and the numbers, if you divide them by 10, are your gallons per acre. So 10 gallon an acre by drone, 5 gallon per acre, and 3 gallon per acre by drone. So you can see, I mean, coverage still matters. Droplet size still matters. None of the base principles are different from any other type of pesticide application. But there are some limitations in the drone world. We simply can't achieve 10 gallon an acre. So we're going to have to figure out how we can do that and at the same time mitigate the risk of drift, which definitely exists. And I'll give our regulators I'll say they're correct there. We need to measure drift, and we're working on that. I'll get into that in a little bit. The other thing we found that first year with this goofy looking picture of me was that accurately ground truthing spray application for something like weed identification and weed targeting requires high accuracy in geolocation. You can't rely on your phone for anything, frankly, in this space. If you're going down a highway and there's another highway a half mile away, well, great, it'll tell you which highway it's on. But within field, taking a picture and hoping to go back to that same weed just won't work. So we've gone now to this Garmin Glow 2 initially, and now we're using survey poles, MLID, and DJI, and sometimes even Trimble equipment to geolocate things more accurately. We've also done a fair bit of testing of different flow rates, different nozzles, then kind of multi-parameter. If you change the nozzle and you change the water rate, what do the droplet sizes look like coming out of a spraying drone? You can't just do this in the lab, unfortunately. The spray dynamics change when you're spraying into a tornado. And that's essentially what's happening by that having a flat fan nozzle underneath a propeller. So we did a lot of testing this way until the atomizers came along, and that will actually change the dynamics significantly because it is a less variable mix of droplets. And so that's one of the things, again, we'll be testing this winter if we can. Otherwise, we'll have to wait till May when things are above zero up here. One of the other things we learned the hard way was that there are a lot of codependent variables here. So you remember the shot I had initially of canola with that nice strip down the middle with everything killed by heat? Well, this was supposed to look just like that. It looks like tire tracks. Nothing was driven through that plot on the left. That was simply the flat fan nozzle, the nozzle itself, the droplets from that shape hitting the crop. I had left people with the instructions that if it's too windy, there's too much side wind, just lower the altitude a little bit to combat drift. Well, it's a fine trade-off, it turns out. This was flown at 1.5 meters above crop with an Agris T10, which moves less air. And because of that, that pattern wasn't blown apart and you weren't getting that deposition the way you need. And if you sprayed an entire field looking like this, you'd be pretty upset. In our regulatory environment, no chemical company is going to stand behind that misapplication, nor will any insurer, because they won't insure you for this at this point. So This is a big cautionary tale, especially when getting into herbicide. I think we need to be careful not to rush in with fungicide and insecticide. Those are much more forgiving, and still, you need to understand your equipment and test your equipment and measure calibration properly.
This is for Arizona gastroenterology.
Sorry?
No, you're good. It looks like someone forgot to mute his.
Oh, okay. So we've been doing some efficacy trials for the last few years on several different products. Most of those are designed to test efficacy for potentially getting some products approved for the Canadian market. The one problem we have is these efficacy trials need to be done for the Canadian market, not necessarily for the US or frankly for many other parts of the world where there's very little regulation of pesticide application by drone. And the chemical companies specifically need to do that work. Our regulator isn't allowing an applicator to do that, for example. It needs to come from the manufacturer of the chemical. And that's a big regulatory barrier that hopefully we'll overcome here in Canada at some point, because essentially this is aerial application, as long as we can get over some of the concerns that our regulator has. And the two biggest stated concerns are drift risk and human exposure. You are refilling that system typically at field scale at every 5 3/4 minutes. So you're filling a tank every 5 3/4 minutes instead of once every hour. There is that risk of higher human exposure. So we're going to have to come up with systems to reduce that risk as well. This is one of the gold standards that we're being asked to compare to. We're doing application by ground versus application by drone, and ground isn't stipulated. So sometimes we use a quad sprayer, sometimes we use a tractor mounted sprayer. Most of the time my summer students get to practice with a metronome to get the right water rate. So this is what our application looks like. For those of you that have seen a drone spraying before, this is a much more accurate way of depositing that water. So I mean, I kind of compare it to when drones first started, surveying companies saying they're never going to be accurate enough, and now every surveying company has a drone in their arsenal. It's not their only tool, but we'll see the same thing with spraying. Aerial applicators will use drones. Currently, there's a bit of a lobby by fixed wing applicators, especially, to keep drones out of their airspace, largely focused on aviation safety, although I suspect business concerns might have something to do with that as well. But in the long run, they have best access to the customer pool anyway. I'm sure all the aerial applicators will be using drones for some things and fixed wing aircraft for other things. The last step for us is then the efficacy evaluation. So we've gone away from having 4 by 6 meter plots to just having a pie plate right next to target weeds. So what you're looking at here is right next to some Canada thistle. We lay those out, randomize the treatment so that we have a true randomized block design, and then measure the efficacy so and so many days after application. I mentioned this earlier. One of my biggest concerns is the spray width, not in terms of regulation even as much as in terms of management concern and making sure that we don't have scenarios where we get poor efficacy from herbicide application in particular. Spray width from a drone when you're spraying into this turbulent air varies with a whole bunch of different factors. Flow rate, droplet size, height, speed, and the specific formulation are the big ones. I'll add a new one to this list, wind direction as well, not just wind speed, but wind direction also has a huge impact. When you fly into wind, your width gets wider. Flying with the wind, it gets narrower. So whenever possible, we're flying in a crosswind. And if that's variable, then that also has negatives. If you've got a fairly consistent side wind, it is possible to manage the offsite deposition. Just to give you a sense of how much it moves a pattern. We did some drift trials last fall, and with an Agris T40 in a 15 km/h wind, so that's about 10 mph, you're getting translocation of 3 meters, so about 9 feet for the center of that deposition pass. And the droplets are going out to 20, sometimes 30 meters from the intended location. So it is definitely something to be concerned about and something to calibrate for. So the way we have been doing spray width deposition was initially with water sensitive paper. We're going away from that to a new system, and we'll be testing some of that this winter or next week, hopefully. The spray width calibration, you see the little yellow blocks there. Those are just wooden blocks with a 45-degree angle cut on them. The 45 degrees being in the direction of wind, and then we fly directly into the wind to measure the deposition. So the drone is flown over the center of these water sensitive paper strips. You can see it's a fairly windy day that day. Also wasn't the ideal location, somewhere where you don't have as much turbulence as in our yard here with the trees, but that's kind of what the water sensitive paper looks like after. It's a yellow paper. It's kind of the industry standard. There's really only two manufacturers left, Syngenta and Spot On. We've been using Spot On paper, but Syngenta works just as well. And just measuring the deposition. And then for these cards, the quick and easy way to do a calibration is you can scan these. There's a couple of systems. ScanLeaf, I think one of them's called. The other one is Scan Card out of Western Australia. And it's just measuring the amount of blue versus yellow in that card, essentially. If that's all you want to do is measure the deposition, the coverage. If, however, you also want droplet size and a distribution of droplet size, then Dropscope out of Brazil is what we use to scan that paper. What we end up with is something like this. So those blocks are 1 meter apart. It'd be nice to go to 50 centimeters, but they're $1 a piece, and we're still farmers at heart, so a little bit we like cost-effective applications. So we're doing 1 meter apart, and the pattern will look something like that. And it's fairly typical to have that much variability even towards the center, and for it to be kind of a very squished distribution with a long tail. What we do is plug that into a spreadsheet. We've developed one with Sprayers 101 is a great resource if you don't know that resource. It's Jason DeVoe and Tom Wolf here out of Canada that have developed a website. It's all free information, and this tool is on there as well, to be able to then measure the coefficient of variation as you change the spray width, so that you can balance the evenness of that distribution with the ability to get the job done, because that's ultimately the balancing act here. It's very much like calibrating a spin spreader. Having said that, most farmers don't take the time to put out the water sensitive paper. We always gave our customers some water sensitive paper, but it tends to stay in the pack. We're comparing with each other. So we use a WhatsApp group between our customers, where all of us are sharing what they are using and the effectiveness, and most importantly, the problems they've encountered. These tend to be the most common settings for the Agris T40. I'll start with one that's not on, well, it is on the list here, speed. Speed tends to be the first setting for most farmers if they're doing this at scale and trying to do thousands of acres. You can imagine what the setting is. Take that slider and move it as far to the right as you can. So that is 20 miles an hour, essentially, is what most people are spraying at, unless they have really high hills, or they have a lot of trees or other things that they're going to have to turn around, in which case they need to turn on obstacle bypass, and that slows them down to 25.6 kilometers an hour instead of 32. But that slider tends to go as far right as it'll go, and then the other settings are based on that. So flow rate typically is 2 gallons an acre, because it's the only thing that really you can get out of a drone that size. Some people have gone 2.2, 2.4 because they can do that in the length of their field and still fill the tank at the end of the field. Droplet size tends to be varied based on wind. I always suggest, again, based on some bad experiences, that droplet size and water always need to go together. So if you're increasing droplet size, you also need to increase the water volume, as much as that may hurt your field efficiency, unless you have some kind of chemical that really can do fine with a coarse droplet and a low water volume. And those, unfortunately, are few and far between. Although I'll tell you what the extreme is that I've heard. 1.2 gallon an acre of Roundup, with the Roundup being 20% below recommendation, is being used in the Ukraine for burn downs. And with a herbicide like glyphosate, that definitely sounds feasible to me. But that's about as extreme as I've heard. And then the last setting here is the height. Typical is 10 to 12 feet above the target, although for spreading applications, sometimes I've seen as high as 50 feet. But for spraying, obviously you want to be as low as you can while still getting fairly even distribution. And that tends to be in the 10 to 12 feet range. As much as we'd like to go lower, that just doesn't work because then you don't get the spreading by the vortexing air. I'll skip a few here, just a few more visuals. Because we have drones, we do a lot of experimenting. The tall guy here is my brother-in-law, Fred, and he loves regenerative agriculture. So because we have the drones, we're doing all kinds of different cover crop mixes. Cover crops aren't widely adopted here in Western Canada. Like virtually nobody's doing cover cropping. We talk about it, we hear about it, but we tried spreading cover crops at different timing, different mixes, just to see what will germinate with a broadcast seed without any incorporation. So it's a great tool for that. Calibration is very similar. So we calibrate our spreaders. This was the Agris T20 by flying over the cone, having a bunch of buckets and weighing how much seed is in each of those, and then using that to calibrate the overlap. That worked fairly well until we got the T40. Hopefully this video will play for you, but this is what happened when we tried calibrating the T40 with buckets. So that tool just didn't work anymore. We found another one, luckily. Amazone is a German manufacturer of spreaders, and they've developed these mats to catch granular product. They also have an app that goes with it. So you scan this purple mat and it will count, essentially do the coverage, just like water sensitive paper for a granular product. Amazing tool for calibrating. It's about, what is it, $900 Canadian, so 600 US. Not everybody's going to buy that, but as a dealer, I think it makes sense to invest in something like this and make it available to your customers. So I'll end here fairly quickly, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about swarming too, because it's seen in the US as this holy grail. Everybody wants to swarm their drones. The practical reality of swarming isn't as exciting as you think it would be. I'll just play this video and then I'll point out what I think the limitation is anyway. So these are two Agris T20s. We have one controller controlling both drones. And normally you would stagger the takeoffs, obviously, but for demo purposes, we've got them both taking off together. One operator, two drones, perfectly legal in Canada. Yeah, I'll just pause it there. Whoops. So the reason that I think this isn't the be all and end all is you notice those drones are each taking a section of the field and flying those. They're not taking alternate passes. You can't have 4 drones currently that all follow each other down to the end of the field and come back and then they follow each other. The logistics of spraying in field conditions with a small tank like we've got is you're stopping at the end of every run. And if you're going to have them alternating passes, you have way too many issues where you're going to have conflict. That's not to say they'll crash. I mean, they all have radar and won't fly into each other. But they aren't aware of where each other is. They aren't aware of how long it'll take you to fill that tank. They aren't aware of whether you're waiting 2 minutes for a battery to finish filling. The current state of the technology, in my opinion, doesn't really give you any benefit to having one controller with 2 drones. And you're filling that tank every 5¼ minutes anyway. So you need a second person there if you're going to have 2 drones for safety, for legal reasons, for as a visual observer potentially. So you might as well have 2 controllers for those 2 drones, in my opinion. The T40 does not swarm, but quite apart from that, I don't think there's any huge advantage because you're sectioning the field into sections anyway, and they're not following each other down alternate passes. So for now, I wouldn't get hung up on the fact that you can't swarm. You need 2 people there anyway. Have 2 people operate those 2 drones. In my opinion, that's just good enough. I'll close on one more before I take some questions. We put on a drone spraying clinic in Western Canada, and I've had quite a few people ask me, why are you teaching people how to do something illegal? Because essentially, farmers call it off-label, but it is illegal to apply any pest control product other than 2 mosquito larvicides right now. And this video, I think, kind of shows why farmers are buying the equipment anyway. So that wasn't staged. That was actual research we were conducting, comparing, again, ground spray to drone application. For an application like this, I mean, this is not even a rough pasture. This is one of our better pastures. It's pretty obvious for most people with common sense that one of those tools is better than the other for that job. The risk to environment, the risk to humans, all of those even are lower by drone here than by ground application. There's, in my opinion, no common sense reason why you wouldn't use a drone in this type of a scenario. It is just the right tool for the job, and there is no other tool for really rough pasture other than maybe aerial application. But even those are very limited. When you've got a lot of trees around, you can't get down there for small brush control. So I just see this being the primary reason that a lot of my customers are buying drones and applying despite the regulations. But that's unfortunately the position we're in Canada right now, and you're blessed in the United States. You can apply legally, so I'm looking forward to meeting a few people down there that are applying product now. Happy to take some questions.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I have a question that's a little off of your subject. Do you know of any drones or any drone programs that can use a drone to identify animals and birds and chase them out of the area?
Yes, I do. Human operators, unfortunately. I have customers that are using it for exactly that purpose. So I had previously the wildlife trampling algorithm. Well, those same customers are using drones to chase elk out of their fields. There's a period of 2 to 3 weeks where they're most actively grazing on peas, for example, and they'll just take the drone out there. I mean, if you wanted to automate that, it is possible with even a Mavic, like a Mavic 3 Enterprise, or even a Mavic 3 Pro, frankly, a consumer model, to create a waypoint mission. I've seen that tried with migratory birds, and it works well with a human operator. As soon as you get into automating that and flying the same mission over and over again, even with migratory birds, they will learn that that is normal and they'll start to ignore it after several days. So I haven't come across that. Actually, there is one example. There's a system being flown at airports, but again, it is being manually operated still, that imitates a raptor. I think it's a kestrel. It's made to look like a kestrel, and then chasing all the blackbirds off of airports. And people have looked at that for tree fruits as well, and for berries.
Thank you. Any other question?
In your testing for the T10, what are you finding for the nozzle size and the pattern?
The T10, generally speaking, because it's such a small unit, tends to produce fairly small droplets as well, because we're applying it at fairly high water volumes given the area that we're covering. We were doing 3, 5, and 10 gallon an acre. And compared to ground equipment, it produces much smaller droplets, especially when you're flying at recommended height. So I recommend 4.5 meters for the Agris T10. Unfortunately, it's very high. That's like 13 feet, because you need all that distance for those droplets to be dispersed enough. But that also breaks down droplet size. So the droplets become smaller between the flat when they leave the nozzle and when they hit the target. So yeah, it's not a very uniform droplet size. You get some very coarse, you get a lot of microfines. it's a great tool for what it is, but I don't think we'll go back to flat fan nozzles on drones anytime soon. Atomizers and new designs of atomizers, I think, are going to be the way to go.
Yeah, specifically though, what size, maybe that's not something you've tested, but what size of the tip?
Oh, well, DJI's system is only built for 1 gallon, 1.5 gallon, 2 gallon nominal flow droplets. Nozzles. We did a lot of testing of the three against each other, and for most purposes, when we're spraying at the 3 to 5 gallon, we were using the 1.5 gallon. So the 110-015 XR nozzles is what we were using for most of the actual application of pesticide.
But that's not on the T10 though, right? Because the T10 is really good for spot spraying. And you only need one pilot. You don't have to have an observer here in the US.
Yeah,
So-
well, here it's even better. You only need a basic certificate. So the same certification that you would need for flying a Mavic recreationally lets you fly a T10. So it definitely has some benefits, and I've sold a fair number of T10s for exactly that reason. We don't have visual observer requirements necessarily for the over 50-pound drones either. So that advantage doesn't exist as much here. The T10 is great for fence lines and for brush control where it's not time sensitive, but the spray deposition simply isn't as good as the Agris T40 or the T20, or what I expect the T20P will be. I haven't flown that one yet. But the atomizers just let you control droplet size much better. The T10, unfortunately, even an 8-kilometer-an-hour wind, you don't even need to test it. You can see the offsite deposition. So you need to be very careful in any windy conditions with that unit.
Yeah, that's used for more spot spraying, what I use it for. And the T20, just for, the P, that one is a really good drone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Any
a
other question?
T40 with the
Okay.
smaller capacity. So I'm really looking forward to that unit.
Any other question? Okay, online. Okay, I have a question. So if you'd like to buy the cheapest drone that can be used for that purpose, like how much it should be? Like if a farmer is interested in buying one, just rough idea.
So in theory, the Agris T10 would be your unit, but 90% of farmers won't buy that. Pricing is $24,000 for a full package with 4 batteries and 2 chargers, Canadian. So that's, I don't know, 19,000 US. What most people are buying is the Agris T40 with 3 batteries and a charger. Pricing here in Canada is 40,000, so that's 30,000 your price approximately. I don't know what your retail prices are there, but in that price range, and that will cover 35 to 40 acres in an hour. So the pricing really is hardware. The low hardware price is a big driver for farmers. The trade-off is labor, but the hardware is incredibly cheap for what you get.
Yeah. And typically this drone should last for a long time, right? Like I have like RGB drones and I have them for a very long time. So you expect them to last for how many years?
I expect they could practically last for 5 or 10 years because there's so few moving parts. In reality, I tell most of my customers to make sure they can amortize it over 2 or 3, because the reality is that you've got one manufacturer here that's developing these, and they tend to produce a new model every year, and then they discontinue, especially the batteries, very quickly. So we found with the Mavic 2s, you can't buy the batteries anymore, or only enterprise batteries. Those are obsolete. Those are sitting on shelves not being used. And I think you'll see the same thing with spraying drones until they become a very common farm implement, and then they'll have resale value. But right now, resale value doesn't exist on these systems. When you upgrade, I took a few of them on trade, so I'm sitting on some T30s if anybody wants to buy those. But I think that obsolescence of the battery, the lack of manufacture of battery, will cause these to become obsolete or replaced within 2 to 3 years. Because practically, if you're using these hard on a farm, you will want whatever the new generation of spray technology is, more importantly than the size of the drone itself. Probably in 2 or 3 years, you'll replace it anyway, and it won't have resale value. So that to me is the biggest downside. But I mean, practically, they'll fly for 5 or 10 years. You just need to replace a motor and a pump now and then. Everything else is going to last forever.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just will end with a statement from me, then we'll go to the field to check we'll test one or two of the drones. So we'll have a ride on one of the trailers here. So it will be a fun ride. It will not take long, but I think you'll like it. So what I wanted to say is when I started using drones, it was in 2015, as I said before. I had lots of doubts, right? I mean, I wasn't sure if I should invest in something like that. And, especially I didn't know anything about drones. So I decided to buy the RGB drone, which doesn't give you, all the stuff that you can get from a drone carrying an expensive sensor. But I said, let's start. And it was a good start for me. One of the things I noticed is the battery life. It was very short, right? The one I have here, I was talking about, it may last, the first zone was like 10 minutes or something like that, right? But I started and I insisted on, having success in that area. And I was discouraged by some people, because this is not, I have background in remote sensing, by the way, but my main focus is on irrigation. I'm an irrigation specialist. So anyway, I continued and I didn't have a sensor because it was expensive. So I approached our colleagues at the USDA, and Eduardo is here from the USDA, and they were able to buy or get a sensor for me, multispectral sensor. And they started, on a next level and had like lots of good data from different fields here in New Mexico, and it was very successful experience, right? And then we bought a more expensive sensor that had the thermal band where you can see temperature and to give you indications of leaks and stuff like that. So I kept moving from one level to another until the last one I said, I cannot get really statistics like in that specific area. How much is my average temperature, for example? And with the help of other colleagues at the USDA, I was able to learn how to do it. So my recommendation, it may seem hard and expensive, $24,000 or $19,000. I think farmers should start looking into drones and, learning about it and investing in it by time. The battery, I started with 10-minute battery. The last drone I bought, it has batteries that can last for 50 minutes. And I'm sure you will have sooner, like a very small battery that can last for longer time, right? And it has more payload, like can carry more like liquids for spraying and stuff like that. So they should invest in that field. And in my opinion, there is a good future for drones, for the use of drones in agriculture. And I would encourage that. At the moment, it may seem, hard, but in my opinion, it's coming. The use of drones for agriculture is coming, and we need to get prepared. I really like to thank all the speakers, who came from far away and from here and presented today. They were very nice. They have very good expertise. If you have any question, I'm sure they would be willing to answer by email. And also I would like to thank you guys for coming here and attending. That was really nice from you to do that. Also, I'd like to thank my team, for helping organizing this event, especially Alvin and Saeed and Jay. So thank you so much. And for Zoom, we'll have to stop here because we'll have to move to the field. We don't have very good internet, so we can show you by Zoom. But would like to thank you so much for attending. And I would like to say this is not the last event for us. Well, this is just a start, and we'll keep updating you guys. We'll have more workshops to show you, like, more things about drones. And I'm positive we'll have like lots of coming events. Thank you all. And that's it for now.
So they want to justify their purchase. But in reality, that is also one of the main things that farmers are using them for.